but like all sorts of things, teams that use heavy motion, and there's teams that struggle with that, teams that don't use as much motion, coverages on the defense, like all of it plays a factor at some point or another. And
welcome to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host, and on this episode, I'm thrilled to have Rob Pizzola on the show. Rob is a professional sports bettor, and he's also the CEO of The Hammer. Among other topics, Rob gives us a sneak peek into how he handicaps the NFL, including how scheme plays a role in that process. He gives us a Week 6 NFL bet. Along the way, he also tells us about teams like New England, San Francisco, and the Los Angeles Rams. The Football Analytics Show is brought to you by the Power Ranks Sports Betting Newsletter. This is a free service that strives to be three things. 1, valuable. 2, concise. 3, entertaining. Every week, I send out 5 Nugget Saturday, my curated list of sports betting tips, analytics, and humor. If you're looking for action on any given weekend, this is the free service for you. To sign up for my free sports betting newsletter, go to thepowerrank.com. That is my site for better sports betting information through data and analytics. Once again, that's thepowerrank.com. Joining me on this episode of the Football Analytics Show is Rob Pizzola. He is a professional sports bettor, and he is also the CEO of The Hammer, a sports betting content network. Rob, welcome to the show.
thanks for having me, Ed.
Absolutely. I always love talking with you, Rob. I've had you on the show many years, and you've talked about many aspects of your NFL handicapping, whether it's yards per play, success rate, player-based models. Maybe for those of you who maybe haven't heard that, maybe give us an overview for how you handicap the NFL and any changes that have happened over the last year.
Yeah, certainly. So I model the games. I'm not a person who, like, I do watch game tape and the games just to pick up on things that I could potentially try to incorporate into models in the future. But overall, what I end up doing is I basically simulate games. So I pit one team against another. I simulate that out. I come up with a projection on the game and ultimately bet the edges, the differences between that and market, obviously taking into account bet timing, what I think other people will be on, injuries, weather, whatever it might be. So there's a lot of people who will take like a numeric or analytical stance on betting the NFL. I know some people use power ratings and come up with ratings for each team and then compare those to come up with their lines. I just have always felt that certain styles or certain teams match up better with others. And I frankly think it would be dumb to just ignore the matchup advantages that one team might have over another. So I model it from that point of view and work with a bit of a larger team or a group of people. And we have sort of a process of deciding on what we're going to bet on. The difference between this year and previous years, Ed, is that I'm running a business full-time now. So CEO of The Hammer, as you mentioned at the beginning, I just don't have as much disposable time as I've had in years past. So more of like a team collaborative effort this year in terms of getting things done, processes that run over the course of the week. But aside from that, it's kind of the same old thing in terms of my style in handicapping games.
Excellent. Is the main component that goes into your simulation, is it a player-based model, player-based metrics?
It's player-based, yes. So one of the inherent challenges is the data that you're working with for NFL, but that's getting better and better every year. So this offseason, we prioritized working with a new data set very heavily to see what we could extract from that. And that's kind of paid some immediate dividends. There was a lot of work that we spent leading up to the season and are still kind of working through that right now. But everything's done at a player level, which is why it's been so heavy in terms of my involvement in the years past. So typically during NFL season, I would be sitting at a computer almost every day of the week, monitoring some sort of Twitter timeline, in terms of player news, injuries, what's happening at practices. Now, a lot of that is more of a collaborative effort, and other people are trained on how certain things will impact teams. But overall, yeah, I think that, the team level stuff, I think, is a thing of the past. It's almost impossible to gain an edge at this point where so many people are working with player level data.
And then you also talked about matchups, right? So I feel like that should probably naturally just come out of your player-based analysis, right? If you have, great run stopper on a particular team and another team that can't run the ball, then that's a certain edge for the defense. Is that kind of how that works?
Yeah, it's a little bit more specific than that as well, because you can use blanket rushing metrics, like rush EPA, success rate, whatever you want to do, and whatever you feel is of value. But even the direction that teams might run the ball could have an impact on the game, depending on who's playing on one side of the defense versus the other. But like all sorts of things, teams that use heavy motion, and there's teams that struggle with that, teams that don't use as much motion, coverages on the defense, like all of it plays a factor at some point or another. And as now that we're able to see this data and extrapolate this, how does a team fare against two high safeties? How do individual players within that team fare against that on offense, opposite side of the ball, zone blocking schemes on the offensive line, whatever it may be? We're at the point now where we do have pretty good data and like on all of that stuff. So incorporating that as best I can see fit is important to me, and just kind of staying up to date with everything that I think actually matters throughout the course of a game.
Awesome. Love it. Rob, we have a limited data set with football, NFL to begin with. Do you ever kind of concern yourself with a small sample size when you're really drilling down to, for example, like how does the defense do with two high safeties versus like single high where they're usually playing man? Do you have, how do you consider the small sample size?
So there's going to be a lot of cases when you're betting in the NFL where you're just going to deal with a small sample size. And I'm more willing to work with small sample sizes than I think a lot of people that model games are. I think a lot of people just dismiss certain things as noise. So what I typically like to do when I see something in the data that small sample sizes, that's when I'll kind of watch game film as well. I do watch condensed games every single week on Monday, sometimes bleeding into Tuesday, for specific things, to see if I can verify what the data is showing. And this is where we get into like a little bit more of a gut feeling and just kind of trusting your instincts. But there are certain things where I might have like a 12 play sample, but I watch them and I feel like it's very likely that this is just going to continue in the future based off of what I'm watching. There'll be other times where I'll watch that exact thing, 12 game sample. I'll be like, this is kind of weird. I'll hold out on this. So I don't want to give away too much that's proprietary, Ed, but like,
of course.
I am more willing to deal with small sample sizes and come to a conclusion quicker on something than I think a lot of other people in the space are.
Fascinating. Rob, you also talked about doing a simulation of the game. If I'm not mistaken, I believe that's the first time that I've talked to you about that kind of simulation. Do you feel like the big edge there is being able to simulate out like key numbers of 3 and 7, or is it to get like cover probability as opposed to just win probability, or what's the main advantage there in your eyes?
So definitely for alternate markets, things of that nature, it's really helpful. To be honest with you, I'm just really comfortable with it. So when I first started modeling, I was mostly dealing with linear regression models. And then around, I'm horrible with years and dates, but I think it was around 2017 or 2018 where I took over Prediction Machine from Paul Bassier for 1 year. And Prediction Machine was built entirely as a simulation engine, which I hadn't worked with before. And over the course of that year, I got to work with it a lot more. And I just became extremely comfortable with doing things that way. And it naturally just became what I gravitated towards wherever I could. So there's no real great reason for it other than just comfort level and the ability to price things rather easily in a lot of derivative markets, and now some player props, which I'm dealing with as well, kind of just being able to get all the results in one shot. Excellent.
You mentioned a little bit about player props. Is that a bigger part of your betting this year as opposed to past years?
It is. I always dismiss player props because of a couple reasons. One, people that I worked closely with when I first started betting were heavy hitters. Like they were betting a lot more than I was. They were kind of showing me the ropes. And a lot of the knowledge that I had about player props at that time was we can't bet this stuff because we're going to lose these accounts if we start betting this stuff, which is true. But there's a balance of your ROI and like just, I could bet major market NFL forever. And I know what ROI roughly I expect to turn over time. But I could bet player props and the ROI is significantly higher on those because it's a softer market. So there's a lot more balance in what I do nowadays. And especially since there are, I'm in Ontario, there's like 40 regulated sports books in Ontario right now, roughly around that number, that are all offering different numbers. It just becomes a little bit easier to win, or at least win a bunch of cash up front. Is it sustainable? No. Or at least not to the level that I would like it to be. I don't have the grind in me like some other props bettors do, but it's definitely a means to find some huge edges and bet them. Like you're not going to find 15, 20% edges on NFL sides and totals, even if you're betting early in the week. And I consistently get those on player props. So for me, it's about timing, trying to put those into accounts when I think that, maybe where the longevity of the account might be a little bit more. But yeah, it's definitely part of the process for me now. I kind of just realized I was probably leaving a decent sized amount of money on the table by dismissing them.
Right. So the profit that you're getting from them, the hassle of dealing with getting accounts shut down, you found it to be worth it with at least NFL player props.
Yeah, and I've definitely learned a lot of things as well. I did an interview 2 or 3 weeks ago with Ship the Justice, Shipper. Whether you like him or hate him in the space, he did provide a lot of valuable knowledge in that interview because he used to work as a recreational sportsbook trader at PointsBet, and he kind of walked through a lot of the processes in how players are limited nowadays in the regulated market. I personally consulted for sportsbooks in the past as well and worked very closely with trading teams. So I had a lot of that knowledge. So just putting a lot of this knowledge together and keeping the accounts alive as long as I can has made it worthwhile. If it was me, placing 2 or 3 bets and then getting limited, I wouldn't go down this path. There's no point. It's definitely a frustration point. But ultimately, like I said, a lot of times the edges that you have on these markets just outweigh everything else, and you're not going to find those edges. So that's one thing. And then the second thing, Ed, is like a lot of people are dismissive about the amount of money that you can actually get down on a specific prop if you work hard at it or you know where to look. So that's another thing as well. It was pretty eye-opening to me when I first started dabbling in this stuff last year in terms of how much I could actually get down on one specific prop that I had a really large edge on, and that makes it entirely worth it.
Excellent. I've been thinking about props a lot too, Rob. Especially, it started in baseball because I needed something for my newsletter this summer and kind of decided to continue it on into the NFL, and that's been going well. So I've been kind of thinking about it too. Like, where do you think the NFL prop market is going, right? Like it's probably going to get sharper as more people start to bet it, as people start to realize, it's really hard beating sides unless you have like a ton of time and really know what you're doing. Do you think there's certain prop markets that are going to sharpen first? Like maybe the quarterback ones or receiving ones, or like, how do you think that's going to evolve?
So I would say that the markets are pretty sharp as is now. So I don't know that we're going to see a lot of changes in the next 5 years or so. And I say this as someone who produces regular content and educational content in the space. I had this theory a couple years ago that as regulation happens and bettors lose, they're probably going to start to seek out more educational content, try to refine their craft. I don't necessarily see that happening, at least from my lens. I think a lot of the betting that's happening nowadays is just very similar to what was 2 years ago. Now, there's more tools out there. There's a lot of better prop projections out there and things of that nature. But ultimately, there's still a lot of edges to be had. I don't know that the behavior is going to change all that much. I think I really overrated that. because of my own personal experiences where I lost a lot of money and I made a conscious decision to say, why am I doing this? This is not healthy. I need to figure out a way to bet and be able to win because I'm not enjoying this. I just don't see that same sentiment in the market, Ed. So I still think that there's like a lot of dead money out there right now. I don't see that changing anytime soon. In terms of the sharp market, the only thing that I've noticed is that there's kind of like just a race to beat others to market now, right? The way that the NFL market is starting to evolve or has evolved is just people betting earlier and earlier to try to front run or one up somebody else out there. So that's the biggest change. Like the market sharpens quicker, but that doesn't mean that there's not still edges to be had.
Right. I mean, I just started dabbling in this, so I really don't know what I'm talking about. But like I agree with you. Like people are going to be getting out there, sharpening things earlier. There's a certain group out there last year that was, just releasing these things as soon as they came out, and people were hammering them. And I get that, right? But it like the surface area is just so large, right? When you think about the NFL, you think about every receiver, you think about all the quarterback statistics that you can do. You think about like sacks and things like that, which is something that I would love to find some time to get into. Like, it just feels like there's such a big surface area that there's like a lot of pie to go around, right? And I mean, I feel like just looking at basketball and baseball props, especially basketball, I feel like there's still a lot of, I feel like there's just a lot of unders to be had that are to get close to game time. Like a guy gets hot and like, there's still people betting is over on whatever it could be, points, receiving yards and whatnot. And there's some inevitable regression there, right? So I don't know. That's just a wild take that I have. Just wanted your thoughts on that. And please feel free to tell me if I'm crazy.
Well, it's an interesting market for sure. So like you have like a lot of props release services now. I'm speaking specifically to NFL because this is my bread and butter, and this is what I and like 3 years ago I would have never looked at a player prop ever. I was doing shows. People would message me in the comments like, "What do you think of this player prop?" or whatever, and I'd be like, "I have no idea. I don't even look at this stuff." Now I'm very focused on it over the course of a week, but there's a lot of influential people in market, and you have services like Establish the Run. A good friend of mine in Hitman who puts out a lot of prop plays. And I mean, what you get is a steady movement on a lot of these releases. A lot of times I find that they overmove, and you can possibly play back on the other side in a lot of these instances. But overall, I do the pizza buffet on Forward Progress, 11 a.m. every Sunday morning. 12 o'clock comes, I'm off air. Basically up until game time, I'm betting props. This is the last hour, supposed to be like the most efficient market, and it definitely is from a sides and totals perspective, and it might be still from a props perspective as well, but there's still so many edges to be had at that time. And somebody might say to me, well, Rob, if you're finding edges at that time, you're doing something wrong. I've heard somebody has said that to me before. My ROI dating back to last year is astronomical on these types of bets, like an hour before game time. So I don't think I am. And that just doesn't exist anywhere else. So that's kind of why I'm focused on it. And it is a sharp market in the sense that, there's a lot of movement. Numbers tend to get bet into the appropriate ranges, but there's so many props out there. There's just so many on a weekly basis. And you wonder who's betting what, who's focused on this, who's focused on that, who's looking at alternate lines. And I just think that when you're presented with this many options, it's so hard not to find something that's playable and a decent size edge, even if it's right before a game.
Rob, I would not question at all that well, I would certainly not say you're doing it wrong by betting props before the game. I mean, I've done that a bunch this year. It's worked out pretty well. And yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. Like you certainly are not going to get that in other markets. And I also appreciate, like you've been very open, you do these shows where you give out sides and totals on Sunday morning, and you're very explicit that you don't expect to be positive or that you don't expect to have a great ROI on that. Right. So I just feel like, we can trust you when you say, hey, props are going pretty well when I bet them an hour before kick.
Yeah, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure it out. I'm doing a show and I'm looking at limits at Pinnacle, and it's 100K per side, and Circa is 100K per side. Chris is like 50K per side at that time. I listen, I'm successful NFL bettor, but I know where my bread and butter is. I don't bet on Sundays unless I really, really feel something like I have something, a piece of news that the market might not know about or anything like that. But I just don't bet on Sundays. And that's because like I'm not an ego-driven bettor. I don't strive to be the best bettor in the world, right? Some people do, and to each their own. I strive to make enough from betting to sustain the life that I want to live. That's kind of what keeps me going. And I know where my bread and butter is and what my wheelhouse is. So most of our betting is done by Friday night, and I kind of just like wash my hands with it type of situation. So I think it's important to, especially doing content, to let the audience know that I'm not comfortable betting these things. I know that there's people who find value in this show and they just like the breakdowns of it, but I think it's important to be explicit about that. But that's, I just tell it how I see it, Ed. I mean, I've always been like that. And I don't care if I have a losing ROI on that show. I'm not betting that stuff regularly, and I don't advise people bet that stuff regularly.
But they do, because that's how people are.
Well, you know what? And that's where we get into like a tricky territory is, and I think it's a fair conversation to be had where people have come after me before and they're like, why even do that show then? Like if you cannot provide value in the form of picks at that time, then why even do it? I think at the end of the day, you just arm people with the ability to make decisions on their own behalf. And I'm explicitly clear that I do not have an edge at the time of that. I'm explicitly clear that I do that show because it would be idiotic to run a content company and not do a Sunday morning NFL show. Yeah, like it would just be insane. So I've always made those intentions very clear. And at the end of the day, people can bet however they want to bet. I try to preach playing responsibly. It's extremely important. But there are enough people that just constantly, like, I get messages months before the season is starting about whether or not that show is happening. So there's obviously a demand for it, and I would be insane if I didn't do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to do what people want, and people clearly want that show. Rob, is there a week 6 NFL bet that you would be willing to share with us?
There is. So I've bet a few things right now. I really like the New England Patriots this week at the Las Vegas Raiders. I'm not convinced that this is the best time to bet them or you're going to get the best price, but this is my largest edge at current market numbers, roughly +3, -105 across the board right now in market. And the Patriots offense has looked horrendous. A lot of people have talked about this, but I think where we're getting now is to a point where we've gone too far to one extreme just based off of the quality of competition that the Patriots have played. So when you look at the defenses that they've played this year, you've got the Eagles, you've got the Jets, you've got the Cowboys, you got the Saints. Like at the end of the season, those might be 4 of the top 10 defenses in the league in terms of EPA and success rate. So I don't want to overreact too much to that. The Raiders are not that defense. The Raiders they play too high. They invite everything underneath, which is kind of exactly how the Patriots offense wants to function anyways. Run the ball, throw short passes. Jordan Love couldn't do that because he just doesn't have the experience and he got the happy feet in the pocket. But I think New England's offense will look a little bit better this week. So that's definitely one of them. I'm also on the Vikings again this week at -2.5. There's obviously inclement weather projected for that game, especially heavy gusts of wind, which there's been a lot of argument that this is really going to favor the Bears because they played an inclement weather game last year early on against the 49ers and won that game. I'm not really buying that all too much. That was a different quarterback for the 49ers than they have now. And on top of that, I'm just looking at these teams and how they match up on paper. The Bears running back depth chart right now is extremely thin with the amount of injuries that they're going through. If it does turn into a game where teams can't throw deep and it's more of a running style game, I don't think that's necessarily a disadvantage to the Vikings. I think we've come a little bit too far here. a lot of hype around the Bears. Big win last week. Congratulations to them. They lost to the Broncos the week prior to that, and we're very quick to forget about that. So Minnesota -2.5 is another look for me.
Excellent. Yeah, let's go back to New England. This is actually something I wanted to ask you about a little bit more. It's Bill Belichick used to be this kind of icon of coaching, and every team goes through rough spots, but do you still kind of have faith in him? And how does that? Is it just Mac Jones, or you've already said that Jones is probably fine. It's just the quality of defense that he's been facing, but he's gotten benched at least once. I don't know if he was benched 2 weeks ago as well, but maybe talk a little bit more about kind of your faith in that team and the franchise.
I think back-to-back weeks, Mac Jones has gotten pulled. So I lost faith in Bill Belichick a long time ago, honestly. I think at his peak, he was a very, very good coach. Obviously, he had a great quarterback, but he was doing things at one time that nobody else was really doing. He started with like the early gambles on fourth down. Over time, just the league has caught up to him, in my opinion. Things were supposed to be different with Bill O'Brien as their offensive coordinator this year. Looked kind of good in week 1 against the Eagles. I thought to myself, yeah, maybe it is a little bit different and this is going to be the Mac Jones year. But ultimately, the offensive line hasn't been good enough. There's been some injuries in and out of the lineup. The skill position players on the offense aren't good enough. I don't want to just hang this all on Belichick. I just don't think the team is very good. But part of that is he's been part of building that team and being part of the drafting process. So he needs to take some ownership and some blame for it altogether. I just do think, though, if we look at the Patriots offense, right, Mac Jones, through his career, has a 2.6 turnover-worthy play percentage, 2.6%. This year, it's 6.3% on the season. He has 6 turnover-worthy plays on short passes, so 0 to 9 yards. And that's just a product of him facing relentless pressure. Really, the teams have been able to get home. Teams like the Cowboys, the Jets, the Eagles, 4 pass rushers really dominate the New England line of scrimmage, and teams are just taking that away from him. There's been some deflections, screen passes that have resulted in interceptions. That's not going to continue for the rest of the season. I think it's much more likely that regresses to his career number. On top of that, he was very good at utilizing play action last season. That was a big thing for the Patriots offense. Maybe not so much deep down the field, although he was very good at those throws as well. And that's just not working for them this year because, again, they've faced teams that have been able to get into the backfield very quickly. So I'm not a Mac Jones apologist. I actually don't think much of Mac Jones. He's a well below average quarterback in the league. But the where we've seen them in the last couple weeks, I don't think is an accurate indicator of what the offense could be, which will be a lot better against worse defenses. So Belichick, he's lost it a bit. Mac Jones, I'm not a fan, but honestly, I think both of these guys are being a little bit undervalued.
They face Las Vegas, and you've talked about matchups, and I feel with Las Vegas's defense, you have Max Crosby and a bunch of dudes, right? So that's part of the handicap here as well.
Yeah, I was doing a live watch along of the Raiders and Packers on Monday night, and they brought up, the initial screen where they list every single player on the defense that's starting. And I don't know how many probably 90% of NFL fans could not name a second defender that starts for the Raiders other than Max Crosby. And that's been the case for them this year. Their pressure rate is extremely low. They've struggled outside of him to generate anything. They've played a style of defense that's become more prevalent in the NFL nowadays, where they're just kind of encouraging teams to try to march downfield on them and prevent the big play from happening. And that's somewhat worked in terms of not giving up as many points as they have in the past. But from a success rate and EPA perspective, they've still been a bottom 7 defense in both of those metrics this year. So, they're doing what they can with the limited personnel that they have on defense. But when they face good teams, good offenses, good quarterbacks, anyone that can consistently march down the field, they're just going to struggle, and they're going to have to pray and cross their fingers that they can get a stop in the red zone. It's just not a very talented defense. And, that's been the case for the Raiders for a while now, but ultimately this year might be the worst.
Yep. Rob, you also talked about Minnesota -2.5. I believe Justin Jefferson is out. I don't know if he's on IR, but I don't think he's playing this week. That's how you've obviously considered that. So you don't think it matters enough against the Chicago defense?
Well, I think it's already been factored into the price for sure because of the money that's come in on Chicago. But this is where I think that matchups are important in the NFL because the Minnesota Vikings receiving core without Justin Jefferson is going to take a massive hit. It's significantly worse. You lose arguably the number one receiver in the NFL. Their top three receivers now are KJ Osborne, Jordan Addison, Brandon Powell. We'll probably see them utilize their tight ends a lot more, TJ Hawkinson and Josh Oliver. Maybe more of a running game with Cam Akers taking a little bit more of the load from Alexander Madison. It's not a great group in terms of weaponry. Against a lot of teams, I would not be looking to back the Minnesota Vikings this week. But the Chicago Bears secondary is horrendous. I mean, they have Josh Blackwell on IR, Kyler Gordon on IR. I think he's eligible to return, but probably not playing this week. Eddie Jackson, their star safety, has been injured. Jalen Johnson, a number one corner, injured. Terrell Smith, another corner that's been injured. They've just suffered through cluster injuries in their secondary where pretty much I think anyone can move the ball on this team through the air. So I think, again, had Minnesota gone up against teams that a team that has maybe good cover corners, I would hold out no hope for them to move the ball through the air. But I don't think a massive adjustment needs to be made in this particular game.
Excellent. Rob, we had Dallas go to San Francisco in a game that everyone was very excited about. I know you're a Dallas Cowboy fan. It didn't go well for you on Sunday night. Was that game signal or noise?
Probably signal. I hate to say it. We're getting to a larger and larger sample of the Cowboys offense struggling, especially at the quarterback position. Dak Prescott struggling against good defenses. It's kind of been the knock on Dak Prescott over the course of his career, where he puts up better numbers against bad defenses, but anytime he takes a step up in class, he seems to struggle. And now we're getting to the point where I think that's actually something that's meaningful. Particularly what I thought in this matchup San Fran did really well was they were able to... Dallas had the full offensive line this week. Tyler Biotish got injured again, was kind of like in and out for them overall. But that San Fran defense is causing a lot of disruption with their front four, especially on the interior. And they blew up the interior a lot this weekend. Guys like Javon Hargrave, Eric Armstead, when they have Javon Kinlaw in the mix as well, they're able to really disrupt at the line of scrimmage. And that's been a real problem for Dak Prescott over the course of his career. Other side of the ball, they had the best game plan I've ever seen against Micah Parsons. They basically took him completely out of the game. Now that helps when you have a guy like Trent Williams on the offensive line, but they were doubling him, chipping him. They made him like an absolute non-factor in the game, which is so weird to see. And the reason I say that I think that Cowboys performance is signal is I've seen it too many times now with this particular coaching staff, Mike McCarthy in specific, but that was a game where Kyle Shanahan coached circles around Mike McCarthy. And McCarthy is fine, but I just do not have the faith in him to be able to outplan a team with a quality head coach. We've just seen it time and time again. And now we get to a situation where Dallas is very unlikely to win the division this year. In the playoffs, they will likely have to go out on the road at Philadelphia, at San Francisco, and win both of those games. And I just don't see it happening. So I think there's a lot we can take away from past performances against the elite teams in the league and say, this isn't just a fluke that Dallas keeps losing these games. There's really something more to it.
On the other hand, with San Francisco, I mean, is their performance sustainable? I mean, there has to be a little bit of regression just because they've been so good. But what do you feel about that team?
There are lots of times, and people have short memories, where a team will get off to a start like this in the league and people just think that they're untouchable. They're by far the best team. This is a Super Bowl lock or whatever. I'm very, very impressed with San Francisco. I love the coaching staff. I love the personnel on both sides of the ball. Brock Purdy has actually, his numbers have been a little bit better than the tape, I will say, this year, where I've seen him miss a lot of throws this season, but they're consistently putting up a ton of points. I think now every regular season game he started, they've scored 30 or more points in those games. So there's that. There's all of that. But the season goes on. There's more tape. There, other teams can, it takes one blueprint from one team to shut down another, where this is a copycat league and everyone just starts to do it. This happened with Patrick Mahomes with the 2 high safety looks. It happens with everyone, where some team has a great defensive performance. And I don't think San Francisco is necessarily immune to that. Now, can they overcome that? Sure, it might take them some time. But let's pump the brakes on the 17-0 season and that they're just going to, walk their way to the Super Bowl. I've been watching football my whole life. I've seen teams like this come along every single year that people think are untouchable, and then they just inevitably have a stinker game or come down to earth. So I'm very high on the Niners. I don't want it to sound like I'm, belittling them in any way. They're very, very good, but historically good level, like has been talked about this week, I'm not coming close to that just yet.
I would completely agree with that. I mean, I do think, you do have to put them in the Super Bowl favorite type category now, but it's almost, I've been saying this all week. It's it's kind of the wrong time to peak for an NFL team, right? And it's not like you really have too much control over that, but there's a lot of football to play. There's a lot of good teams out there, and they're not gonna continue quite at this level. Rob, how do you kind of separate your fandom? I know you're a Dallas Cowboys fan with kind of your analysis. Is that hard, or you've just been doing this so long that it's kind of natural?
At first, it was very hard when I first started betting. I would just kind of avoid games that involved any of my favorite teams. Now it's a lot easier because it's kind of like my livelihood, right? If my biggest edge in a week is betting against my favorite team, well, I'm gonna do it, and I'm not gonna be happy about it. It's gonna suck, but ultimately, I think it's just critical for sports bettors to think like that. Especially when you're dealing with the NFL and there's already so few games every single week. You can't just cross one off the board and say, I'm not betting this because my favorite team is involved. You potentially lose out on volume over the course of the year, maybe 6 plays, 9 plays, whatever it might be involving your favorite team. So I don't know how I do it other than that. It's just common nature. It's second nature to me at this point right now. It doesn't even cross my head as I'm considering betting over the course of a week that, hey, this is the Cowboys, and do I really want to bet against them this week in this must-win game for them to get in the playoffs or whatever? I don't even have that thought. So it's taken several years to get there, but it's just second nature at this point.
Excellent. Rob, is there a surprising prediction that you'd like to make for the rest of the NFL season?
Sure. Maybe not super off the radar, crazy prediction, but I'd say it's probably an underdog right now. I'll say that the LA Rams will make the playoffs this year as a surprise prediction. I'm definitely not in favor of them being favored by a touchdown this week. I don't think that they're a team that's going to win by margin a whole lot because their defense is still really bad, but their offense is extremely impressive. And I've upgraded them a lot since the beginning of the season because of the emergence of the secondary receivers. Tutu Atwell, Puka Nacua. This is a very strong receiving core with Cooper Kupp back right now and Alaric Jackson back at left tackle for them as well. So I'll say that they'll make the playoffs. They've played a really tough schedule this year of opposing teams. Seattle, San Fran, Cincinnati, Indy, Philly. They've held up through that stretch. And the NFC, there's a lot of teams that are in the mix right now that I think have a very high likelihood of falling off by season's end, whether that's the Bucs or the Falcons, a few others in there as well. So that would be my surprise prediction. I know people are coming around on the Rams, but I think they're going to make the playoffs this year.
I like it, Rob. What was your preseason prior on the Rams?
Ooh, good question. Let me pull it up right now for you.
Numbers are great, and I definitely want to know what your number was, but more your sense. If I asked you about the Rams 5 weeks ago, kind of what would you have said?
I would have said that I'm not super high on the Rams because, in particular, you have Matt Stafford coming off like an injury riddled season. He's pretty old right now. The likelihood that he's going to get through this season unscathed is pretty low. And then because the Rams do not own a lot of future draft picks and they have assets in guys like Aaron Donald, you could get to a point over the course of the season where you just blow it up type of situation. But that's changed for me pretty quickly. And again, it's the performance that they have at receiver. For me right now, like I've upgraded the Rams by almost 3 points versus a league average team since the start of the season in the span of 5 weeks.
Yeah, and in the NFL, that's a ton. Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like I thought that they had potential to be, I don't know, there were like 5.5 wins in the market. And, there's a lot of the same players that won the Super Bowl not too long ago. And do I think they're a Super Bowl caliber team? No. Even that one, not necessarily. Then kind of Cooper Kupp goes down. And I feel like I kind of read some stuff and kind of talked myself out of the Rams, but maybe I shouldn't have, if you know what I mean, right? I mean, there's still some talent on that team, and the whole like stars and, let's get some stars together and just fill out the rest of the roster. I think a lot of people were kind of saying that's not a good idea. And while that might be true, it certainly worked for them in the past, right? Yes. So I feel like, I don't know. I don't know where to go. I feel like we do this like every preseason. Like we feel there's a lot of talk that the Rams are this high variance team and we don't really know. And I feel like I kind of bought into the low side of the Rams, which the market was saying too, right? And maybe that was not right. I don't know.
Yeah, it's in hindsight, like Ed, we can do this to ourselves forever, right? We could look back at every prediction we got wrong prior to the season. Like we live based off of probabilities. And I think in hindsight, you can look back and you can see what you see with the Rams now and say, I should have saw this coming at some point. Well-coached team, Sean McVay, Matt Stafford is still Matt Stafford, but there was just so much risk, especially when Cooper Kupp went on IR before the season. Like the defense to me on paper is still very poor outside of Aaron Donald. So you could see that team fall off a cliff. But the telling point for me, if you look at the 49ers this year, right? They played the Steelers, Rams, Giants, Cardinals, and Cowboys. I think the Rams gave the 49ers the toughest test that they've gotten so far this season. Yeah. They were really in that game for about 3/4 of it. And, that was the eye opener for me, because you could look at them in week 1 and be like, Seattle, the Rams beat them handily, which by the way, looks like an even more impressive win now since Seattle's turned it around. But you could have talked yourself into, maybe Seattle's a bit of a fraud. Geno Smith struggled down the stretch last season. Then you see that San Fran game, and it's really hard to slow down this Rams offense. It is. I mean, the Eagles did it last week in the second half. Really good second half adjustments, but this team is definitely in the mix for a playoff spot at this point.
Absolutely. Like, I feel like they are having the kind of season that I thought Denver might have. And I spent a lot of the preseason talking about Denver as a high variance team, and there's a lot of pieces for them to be good, make the playoffs, and look where they are.
Yep.
So
I talked myself out of a very large bet on Denver under season win total. And again, one of the challenges with preseason, I do my own numbers and I trust my own numbers, but I respect other people's opinions as well. And I'm not immune to consuming other content or talking to people and saying, hey, you know what? This guy made a really good point about a specific team. And there was some stuff that really scared me off of Denver, in particular, Sean Payton being there. And I have a ton of respect for Sean Payton as a head coach. I didn't see it on paper for them, honestly. I don't like their roster offensively, defensively, wasn't buying the Wilson resurgence. But whenever you install, a Hall of Fame coach into a team, like considered arguably the largest upgrade in coaching history from one season to another, it's hard to just dismiss that and ignore it. So I'm beating myself up over that one. But if we do that, Ed, I can beat myself up over everything that I missed from the beginning of the year. Ultimately, you use the information that's available to you at that time to make a prediction on a certain team and how they're going to fare. And we're going to get some right and we're going to get some wrong. There's just no point in really dwelling on it.
Yeah, and hopefully we get more right than we get wrong. Rob, you are the CEO of The Hammer. It is a sports betting content network. You guys are doing so much stuff over there. Maybe give us a couple highlights of both like shows that you are on and then maybe shows that you have other people working on that you think are doing a really good job.
Yeah, no problem. So like at its core, The Hammer is just basically a collection of YouTube channels and podcasts. That's like really dumbing it down. And we've tried to separate things out by different sport. And the reason we do that is just because of like the YouTube algorithm. Somebody who consumes NFL content might not consume MLB or NBA, and housing that all on one channel might do us a disservice. But ultimately, that's what we are. Our NFL division is called Forward Progress. And we are live 6 out of the 7 days a week with different forms of content. And myself in particular, I appear on a Wednesday show, which is our best bets show with Fabian Sommer, Suma, Eric Eager, and Hitman. And then I do a lot of content on Sundays as well. So the Pizza Buffet, which I referenced earlier, 11 a.m. Eastern time, I just gave my thoughts on every single game that's on the board. And if I hadn't bet anything over the course of the week, what would I consider betting at this point? But really what I love to do on Sundays is at 8 p.m. Eastern time, which is like a recap of the day, but also reacting to the game lines as they're posted in real time. So we basically pull up an odds screen as game lines get posted for the upcoming week. I just give like my unbiased reaction to what's there. I don't run numbers on anything. It's just like, this is what I think is right. This is what I think is wrong. And a lot of people get value in that because they get out and they're able to bet some early games over the course of the week and get some good closing line value. So we do all of that on Forward Progress, but we have a collection of YouTube channels. If you were to go over to the Forward Progress YouTube channel, just click on channels. You'll see everything that's under the Hammer umbrella. And if you did want to support us, you could definitely subscribe to those channels.
Awesome. Yeah, I am a huge fan of your Wednesday show with Forward Progress. You gave the lineup. Everyone on that show is so sharp. And it's also really interesting to see sharp people being on different sides of games, which happens more often than you might think. And I just appreciate, I think I missed last week, but there's not a lot of podcasts I try to get to regularly, and that is one of them. So congrats on that. And like, how did that kind of come about?
It took a long time to get to where we are now. There was different visions in the early going, but honestly, the formation of the Hammer started just because I could not stand most of the sports betting content in the space. That's just the reality of it. Like something that you mentioned right now, Ed, I think is like, I love what you just said about how you watch a show with 4 different sharp people and they might be disagreeing on games. And that's the way things work in reality. Like I hate consuming content where people are like, oh, this is the sharp side or this is the square side, because that's not like there is going to be a sharp bettor on the different sides of every single game on the board. That's the way the market works. There's competition. It'll move in one direction. Some people will bet it back another way at a certain number, and you just don't get that stuff out there. So it was really just a frustration with the content space. And like, again, I'll be completely transparent with people. Obviously, I saw it as an opportunity to monetize as well and try to grow something where I don't have to be betting for the next 15, 20 years or anything like that, potentially take advantage of the market conditions, growing sports betting and all that, but just wanted to do it in a way that's a little bit more real. And we've put together a group of people that are either like real bettors. And when I say real bettors, I'm talking about people who are willing to put their money where their mouth is, people that are advocating for things that they're betting themselves, or people that are going to provide very actionable info, like an Eric Eager, for example. Eric's betting on the games. He might not be a pro bettor, but I learned something from him every single time I listened to him talk. So basically, at the end of the day, I put together a network of content that I would consume, and I'm proud of that. And I hope that other people find a lot of value in what we're putting out there.
Right, Robin. I feel like it gets better every year, and appreciate all the work that you do. Maybe give us an example of another show on the Hammer that you'd like to highlight.
Yeah, I honestly, it pains me to say this because I have like a budding rivalry with Joey Knish, but the Hit the Books channel that we have going is in my opinion, not even like by far the best college football content that has ever been assembled. The chemistry between Joey Knish and Brad Powers on their shows that they do Monday and Friday, and the community aspect of it is amazing. We also have a Tuesday show with Doug Farmer and Parker Michaels, or Parker Fleming, excuse me, I should say, which is incredible as well. Like, I don't even bet college football. Well, I do, but like I don't keep up with college football, Ed. Like I couldn't name you the quarterbacks for all the Division I teams and whatever, but I tune into every one of those shows every week because there's a great chemistry between the hosts and there's a lot of actionable info in there as well. And most importantly, they keep it real with the audience. They don't hide from losses. Hit the Books is down money this year. I've bet a lot of those games as well, but they don't hide from it. They recap it every single week. We do third-party track every single pick we give out on the Hammer. So if someone wants to check out some college football content, Hit the Books is there. But like I said, we do daily content as well for NHL, NBA, MLB on different channels. And I stand behind everything we produce as I think it's just transparent, honest content from real bettors.
What's your rivalry with Knish?
He will he needles people a lot, including myself. Like, he's just a disturber by nature, which is, I kind of am too, but not to the same extent as him. But listen, all the credit in the world to them for being able to grow that channel to be the largest on the Hammer in terms of subscribers, viewership, because it's honestly really good. But Knish does not have to remind me of that after every single episode he does. That's where I need to draw the line. So no, that's kind of like we've gone back and forth for years, even prior to working together on Twitter. But it is like people sometimes take it for more than it is. It's not. We genuinely like each other, but we do like to needle each other as well.
Yeah, he lives in the greater Detroit area, right?
He sure does. Yeah, he's in just outside of Detroit.
Rob Pizzola, thank you so much for your time today on the podcast. Please let everyone know where they can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. You can always follow me on Twitter at Rob Pizzola. I have DMs open for anyone who ever wants to ask betting related questions. Those are always there. I'm running the Hammer. You can check out the site, which is thehammer.bet. If you want to see our collection of content as well, who our content creators are, you can check that out. Or you can go directly to YouTube, type in the Hammer HQ. You'll see all of our channels that are associated with the Hammer as well, which you can join. And last thing I'll say is if you're looking for betting education, I do run a weekly podcast called Circles Off, which Ed was a guest on at one point before, but I'd highly recommend you check it out. We try to have some fun with it. We try to produce some compelling interviews or Q&As or just general discussion in the sports betting space. So any of those would be fine, but definitely check me out on Twitter as I do like to interact with people.
Rob, you're a pro bettor. You are the CEO of the Hammer. You are doing Forward Progress. You are doing Circles Off, and you are even answering your DMs on Twitter. When do you sleep during football season?
I don't really. Yeah, it's tough, man. Saturdays is like the day that I have for recovery, but also, my wife is used to this by now. I feel bad, obviously, with the amount of time that I spend during football and hockey season with betting. But I try to recover a little bit on Saturdays. That tends to be the day that she wants to do stuff, but it's tough. But I live for it, Ed. Like, honestly, the grind is something, but if it's rewarding for you, and if you're getting a lot of positivity out of it, you feel good about yourself, I don't see the issue with that. And right now, sleep is at an all-time low, but I honestly wouldn't change it.
Awesome. Well, Rob, I personally appreciate all the work you do. So thank you for not sleeping for my behalf. My name is Ed Fang, and I'm proud to be your host for the Football Analytics Show. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Rob Pizzola as much as I did. I've been interviewing Rob every year for I don't know how many years, but it's really interesting for me to watch how his process changes, evolves, gets better. And in sports betting, you always need to adapt. You always need to change, and Rob is a perfect example of that. Just a reminder, you can get my free sports betting email newsletter Every Saturday, I come out with 5 Nugget Saturday, which is my curated list of sports betting tips, analytics, and humor. To check that out, go to thepowerrank.com. Once again, my name is Ed Fang. Thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again soon.